only place for everything Vikings. 6, 1, 2, Vikings.
Welcome back to 612 Vikings. I'm your host, Dustin, alongside Drew, as always. And today we got some good stuff brewing before we get to the start of week one. Drew, how are we feeling after our third and final Vikings preseason game against the Titans? I know it was a loss, but Vikings go 1-2 in the preseason. Not that that matters, but how are we feeling?
Yeah, I think there were some players that definitely took the next step forward, and there's some players that took a step backwards. So I think you kind of got a lot of answers answered in that game because I know there's some debates on who's going to be starting and playing at certain spots. So I think if there was any questions, I think the game was pretty helpful on answering those questions if there was any doubts.
Oh yeah, you kind of watching like the punter battle a little bit. We were all watching how well they hold the football for Will Reichard, and I kind of bring that up because the other punter, why am I blanking on his name? Oscar Chapman. Not a great holder on Friday night's game against the Titans, but just kind of going off of that, we're going to go with our 53-man roster predictions. We're going to start with Drew's roster first, kind of what he thinks, and just kind of go from there. So let's start here. Oh, wrong one. All right, there we go. Drew, if you want to kind of go through and explain what you think.
Yeah, so I think we'll start off at the quarterback one. I feel like that's the most talked about one outside of just the quarterback one, but who's going to be quarterback 2, who's going to be quarterback 3, so on and so forth. So we did have some news that Carson Wentz was coming in on a tryout. So I actually have Carson Wentz being the quarterback 2 just ahead of Max Brosmer because I think the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell want that veteran guy to at least be on the depth chart, be the number 2, where if things, or if something happened with JJ and he was out for the season, God forbid, maybe they'll reassess the depth chart from there. But as of right now, they would probably go with Carson Wentz if they, eventually does happen, they get signed there. And then I have Max Brosmer as the emergency third quarterback. So, when the inactive players come out, they'll have Max Brosmer as the inactive but active, buy that extra roster spot for someone else to come in and play. So that's where I kind of have Brosmer going in. So I think I really kind of like this quarterback matchup. I think Rippon may have had a shot at getting into this roster here and just ultimately just couldn't get it done in the Tennessee game. And I think that was really hurtful for him on making a spot on this roster potentially. So, and then Sam Howell, I think with them bringing in Carson Wentz, I think that kind of signals that the Sam Howell experience might be short-lived in Minnesota. So, assuming that Carson Wentz checks all of his boxes and can pass the physicals. I know he's got some injury concerns in the past, but if he can pass everything that the Vikings deem fit, then I think he'll end up being the quarterback 2 for this roster. And then moving on to the running backs, I don't think this is anything that's too exciting outside of the top 2. Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason, they're definitely making the roster. That's your 1-2 punch. Then Xavier Scott, this is kind of one, there's some questions about it. I know he had an ankle injury, so hopefully nothing, too severe or anything like that. So if, things were to happen where he's put on an IR spot, short-term IR, he's out for the year, we still don't know what's going on there. Then we're reassessing. But as of right now, as of Friday or Saturday, whatever the day of the week is,
They're all the same.
Yeah, Saturday. I would say Xavier Scott, as of right now, there's been no news that he's going to miss significant time, so I'd have him as the RB3. And then CJ Ham, who's fullback, but would classify as a running back on the 53-man roster. Now, the most talked about one, going to wide receiver, I think this one gets really, really interesting. So Justin Jefferson will be playing week 1. Obviously, there's no concerns about that. He's back at practice, and I don't think there's any doubts that he would make 53. But I think the interesting one here is the wide receiver 2. There's been talks about Adam Thielen, Van Jefferson, the former Ram, had a really big game, but there's a name that was thrown out in Robert Woods by Alec Lewis, who I kind of found intriguing a little bit because he's a veteran wide receiver, which I think that's just, for me, it's signaling the Vikings want a veteran piece in this wide receiver room because it's a very young room here after drafting Felton and Naylor and and Addison in years past. They really don't have that like the big bet to kind of lead these guys. Outside, I mean, Justin Jefferson has only been in the league for 5 years, which is really shocking. But I think they want a guy who's in their 30s or pushing 30. So Robert Woods was the name that was thrown out by him, which I have them there as the wide receiver 2 going into week 1. So and you move over to the tight end spot with TJ Hawkinson. I don't think there's any doubt he's going to make it. Josh Oliver, but I had a little bit of a surprise one here. I was kind of debating between Nesbitt and Van Ness here, which I ended up going with Nesbitt here. I think they want to try and get some sort of pass catching, passing offense more with J.J. McCarthy a little bit and kind of give him that aspect to throw the ball, give him a little bit more comfort, which I feel like he does better than Nick Van Ness. But
Yep.
With Bartholomew out and some other guys out as well, I think Nesbitt was the guy that performed the best out of all the young tight ends on this roster in the preseason. So I think ultimately he earned a spot on the 53. Who going in after his freshman year, a lot of people had pegged as those way too early mock drafts was a top 5 pick. So things definitely changed here. So could be a potential steal if he ultimately ends up being selected on the 53-man roster. And then we're going to move over to the offensive line here. We can just show the entire O-line here. We have Darisaw O'Neal, no shockers there. And then Justin School, they added as a free agent from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so a nice swing tackle there. And then Walter Rouse, I think, is an interesting one, too, because he's a guy that can be kicked inside to guard and can play tackle. So he's kind of like a nice little chess piece over there. So I think that's a guy that will make the 53 as well. So and then obviously the guards, it's just gonna be no shocker here between Will Fries and Donovan Jackson. They're going to be making they're going to be starting at that guard positions. And Blake Brandel, I think it would be nice to have some sort of offensive lineman who's got experience, who's started multiple games in a season. So ultimately, that's where I kind of went with Blake Brandel there, someone who just has experience in this kind of offense starting. Then going over to the center position, I don't think this is going to be any sort of shocker here with Ryan Kelly and Michael Juergens. Michael Juergens, they just had a draft pick on him last year going into year 2, played fairly well. And then Ryan Kelly, who they just signed, who is a former All-Pro. So no shocks out of the offensive line for me at least. I feel like this is pretty chalk here. But, moving over to the defensive side of the ball, we'll move over to the defensive line. We have Jonathan Grenard, Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, Gabriel Murphy. At the edge spots, I don't feel like this is anything that's going to be too shocking here. I think this is kind of your chalk, again, going at edge. Defensive tackle, which we talked about in our previous episode with Harrison Phillips being moved over from the Vikings to the Jets in a trade, potentially looking at that wide receiver 2. Maybe that's what's still in play here, but definitely opened up a roster spot nonetheless. So you have Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, and I think Jalen Redmond will fill out where Harrison Phillips ultimately left when in that trade. Maybe they'll have like Hargrave or Allen play that nose tackle position, but Jalen Redmond will kick into that interior spot where there's that gap there. And I think with Levi Drake Rodriguez, with him being greater than 90-plus PFF grade, I think ultimately that solidified him a 53-man roster spot. I think maybe before he could have been a practice squad guy, but the fact that they've been talking so much of how elite his pass rushing skills are, he could potentially be a platoon guy if you need Hargrave to take a break, to have a guy rush the passer at an elite level like that, maybe on those third downs. I think you look at LDR for that. And then Tyron Ingram-Dawkins, so he could kind of platoon between edge and defensive tackle. Ultimately, I put him at the interior spot at the defensive line spot. He had a fairly good preseason, has been really showing out, proving me wrong, which is I'd rather be wrong proven wrong that I said he's going to stink and he ends up doing well. I'd rather be proven wrong in that scenario, which is always good to see. And then preseason star Elijah Williams, I think with that Harrison Phillips trade, I think that opened up that spot for him. And I know there was some talks about him being a little banged up after the Titans game, so hopefully it's nothing serious where maybe he has a spot on the IR, short-term IR. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing as Xavier Scott. Nothing's been announced yet as far as we've seen here, so. As of right now, we're just going into it thinking that he's healthy for week 1, so ultimately we have him making the 53 there. And then kind of completing the front 7 at your linebackers, again, kind of chalk here with Cashman Pace, and then Kobe King, the draft pick they just selected out of this past draft, and then Eric Wilson. So kind of having that nice veteran piece in the linebacker position because, a veteran guy who's walked the hallways of TCO and knows what it's like to be a Viking, and a good special teams player too. So Eric Wilson fills out that last linebacker position. And then moving over to our defensive backs, we have Byron Murphy, Isaiah Rogers, and Jeff Okudah. I think this will kind of be your base, 11 personnel corner look here, it seems like, because Jeff Okudah we didn't see a whole lot of in the preseason, which ultimately kind of tells us, the fans, that they believe in him and they think he's going to be a starter, with the ones throughout the entire season. So fingers crossed he could stay healthy and maybe return back to that 2020, 2019 Ohio State, hype and prospect that he was. Maybe we get a little cornerback magic, a little fairy dust there with Jeff Okudah, the guy who was written off and maybe finds his footing again in Minnesota. So, and then Mekhi Blackman, I feel like he could potentially be a surprise cut, but I just feel like with the guys that they really have behind these three that really just weren't playing all that often, I think that you kind of have to put them there just because none of them really can play the slot unless they were to pick somebody up or pick somebody off of waivers. I think with Mekhi Blackman, I think he's kind of I feel like he's got to be at least your second slot guy. So if you're going 4 wide receivers out there, he kind of has to play the interior slot there. Zamiah Vaughn kind of had an up and down preseason. I feel like he started off really strong and then kind of, fell on his face a little bit in the Tennessee game. It was kind of, a little shaky in week 2, but, I think this could be kind of like a special teams kind of corner here. Nothing special, can just kind of be out there as a gunner and make some plays out there on special teams. And then I think the same goes with McLaurin as well. So having that big body corner, so kind of like your big nickel, going back to the Jaron Kearse days, I feel like that's kind of where McLaurin would really thrive in those goal line packages. On those tight end fades or something like that, you can definitely try to, contest those passes a little bit over there. And then the safety room, this was kind of one I kind of overloaded on a little bit. You look at Harrison Smith and Josh Metellus and Theo Jackson. I think those are going to be your 3, safeties that are going to be playing significant snaps over there. And I added Jay Ward. I feel like with Jay Ward, you bring that versatility as a corner and a safety, so kind of similar to what McLaurin could do in being that big nickel. So, based on what package you get or, matchups we're looking at based on the tight end types, maybe Jay Ward is a better fit for it than McLaurin based on who you're lining up against and who you're playing against. So I think Jay Ward is a guy that could make this roster as well. And then Tavier Thomas is just a special teams ace. He's one of the better special teams guys in the NFL. I know he didn't have the best preseason, but when it comes to special teams, he knows what he's doing. So I do have Tavier Thomas going in as the 5th safety. So I do think that they're going to try to overload this defensive back room as much as they possibly can, because I do think that they know it's a weak spot on the team. And I feel like in those cases, you want to try to load up as much as you can and just see if something sticks or if somebody picks it up in the regular season. And maybe kind of like a Duke Shelley kind of guy. You just kind of throw a guy out there and just see what happens and see if it sticks. So I think that's kind of the route they're going to go with when it comes to the defensive backs. Then moving on to special teams, no shocker out of the long snapper with Andrew DePaula, who's the best long snapper in the league, even though it's not something people really look at when they're watching football, but
we look at it.
Consistent all-pro there. So and then Will Riker, one of the better young kickers in the league. And then this is where things get interesting with Ryan Wright being the punter there. I do have him winning the punting competition over Oscar Chapman. I do believe that things were super close when it came to that, but those little things, just one play can make or break you from making a 53-man roster. And, with the missed hold and the botch hold, kind of pulling a Jeff Locke, Oscar Chapman kind of botched a really long kick, which the Vikings really needed to end the half. So ultimately, I feel like Ryan Wright has a little bit more confidence, a little bit more experience when it comes to holding. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was perfect when Ryan Wright was holding the ball versus Oscar Chapman. So I think both misses came under Oscar Chapman in the Tennessee game, but I'm not sure on that. But Ryan Wright seems to be, even before when his rookie season, he was doing really well before the injury. So I think Wright's the guy for that. So, and then moving on to the longest spots in the practice squad and the reserves. So we have the reserves as Jordan Addison because of the suspension, Rondale Moore because of injury, Alexander Williams, Matt Nelson, Zeke Correll, Gavin Bartholomew, and Jalen Naylor all being on there for injury, with I think Bartholomew and Naylor being on those short-term IR spots there. And then obviously the Williams, Nelson, Correll will be out for the season, so they will be on season-ending IR there. And then go into our practice squad. I have Joe Huber, had a really good first game in the preseason. Kind of had some slip-ups with some penalties here and there in the weeks 2 and 3 game, but ultimately I feel like he was kind of like a fringe roster spot guy for me. I had him kind of in and kind of out, so I feel like there's potential where Blake Randall could get cut and Huber could take over, so I wouldn't be surprised if that happens if they want to try to watch some nickels and dimes over there, especially when you don't really have a ton of cap going in next year, so I could see that as a possibility as well. And I have Taki Taimani making the practice squad as well. A guy who really shined in last year's preseason, had some moments in the second preseason as a second-year player as well. Tyler Batty is a guy who's also injured right now, according to Kevin O'Connell, getting an MRI on his knee, so could potentially make that hop over to the reserve if it is, something where they, if he's going to miss 6, 7, 8 weeks, they're just going to put him on season-ending IR and retain him for next year, and that open up that extra practice squad spot. Bo Richter, fan favorite from the Chicagoland area over there. I feel like he's done enough and knows what to do on special teams and create that fifth edge spot. Oscar Chapman won't really count towards the practice squad spot, but he will make the practice squad as well, especially because he doesn't count towards that. Reddy Stewart I thought he was a guy that was on the fringe of being cut, but had a really good game against the Titans. So I have him making the practice squad as well. And Michael Gonzalez actually had a really good preseason. I was actually pleasantly surprised with that. And I think you kind of want to have that third center on the practice squad. So in case if, Ryan Kelly gets hurt, who does have a history of injuries as of right now, you don't want to run into a 2022 scenario where you're only rolling out one setter and trusting
the Green Bay game.
The ball. So yeah, you need that. You need that third guy. So if things were to happen, you can elevate him and have him be the backup center. The prized UDFA, Logan Brown, didn't really have an elite preseason, but I think, with how much money they've spent over there as well, I think he's going to make the roster. Trey Stewart over there, I think he's, a very high priority UDFA. I think he'll stick around. Ben Urosic, I think, is another guy who's a good blocking tight end. Sean Jones, Lucky Jackson will fill out the wide receiver spots. Chaz Chambliss, nice little edge piece. And then some linebackers. You have Dorian Mousey and Austin Keys filling out some extra linebackers, Dante Fleming. And then I put Vershawn Lee there as an extra offensive lineman as well. And I actually believe I skipped over the bottom wide receivers. So if we go back over to wide receivers really quick, I think I skipped over the bottom. So I had Ty Felton, Miles Price, and Silas Bolden will fill out the kick returning duties, with Miles Price most likely being the punt returner, and then Thayer Thomas being that sixth wide receiver over there. So that is where I'm at when it comes to where I see the 53-man roster. Obviously, I'm not going to bat 1,000, so but it's kind of, I feel like, a good outline of where I think most Vikings fans are, where they're thinking. So just where the things could go wrong is just more like who's going to be the DB5 or DB6 or wide receiver 6, I think, is where things will get a little interesting there. But Dustin, I will turn it over to you, and I will have you reclaim your time as they say, because I feel like it's a lot. So we'll send it over to you on what your thoughts are on the 53.
Well, what's nice about this is that I can, the 53-man roster will be a good collection of guys that we already know will make the roster. I might have a few surprises in there, so I won't have to talk too long about it. But let's go over to my roster. I think my math is correct. I mean, some guys that I have on here are just kind of outliers. So kind of starting with the quarterbacks, JJ's your starter. I'm just kind of going off of guys that are on the roster right now as we speak. So Sam Howell would be your QB2, Max Brosmer 3. I know these are supposed to be projections, but I can't project that Carson Wentz was going to be on the roster, 24 hours ago. But Carson Wentz Drew talked about it. He could possibly be that QB2 if he does sign with the Vikings. In that case, if he does sign, I think Sam Howell is on his way out. There's no point in keeping Howell and Carson Wentz and then not keeping Max Brosmer on the roster. So just kind of interesting there. Running backs all the same. Wide receivers, it kind of gets interesting. So Jefferson, kind of questionable on him. I didn't know if he was going to make the roster or not. No, he's making the roster. Thielen, I put in a question mark because there's been a lot of steam about Thielen. Is he going to be traded to the Vikings? Is he not? There's a lot of give and take with that the past couple days where a lot of people have confirmed, oh yeah, he's coming to the Vikings, and then a lot of people are confirming, oh no, there's nothing intimate yet. So I just kind of put Thielen on a question mark. He's not counting towards my 53 right now. It's just kind of question mark if he is here. Miles Price, I feel like he could be your kick or punt returner, more likely your kick returner. Silas Bolden on there, Deshaun Jones, Tim Jones, good special teams guy. I don't know if they necessarily let go of him or not, but I think a good couple preseason games for Deshaun Jones. Finished strong, especially that Tennessee game. Brosmer and Jones had a good show out. So, tight end room, we got T.J. Hawkinson, kind of top heavy in our tight end room as well. Hawkinson, Oliver, and then I have Ben Urasek on there. A lot of our other tight ends just not very trustworthy when you want to pass or run the ball, whatever it is. Just really haven't watched them much in the preseason. You could add a guy like Nick Van Nett if you want to cut out a roster spot for anybody else, but as of right now, I think Ben Urasek had a pretty good camp. Preseason, kind of up in the air to be debated, but other than that, offensive line, Christian Darrisaw. I just noticed that Brian O'Neill is spelled wrong, but that's all right. Offensive tackles, Darrisaw, O'Neill, and then Rouse. Offensive guards. This one might shock some people because, as you guys can see, I did not have Justin School on there. I think you have to give and take with what you have on the offensive line. And I have Will Fries, your starting right guard, starting left guard Jackson, your backup swing guard and tackle Blake Brandell, and then I have Joe Huber on there. I think he's done enough to make the 53-man roster where he's a little too valuable, kind of like Max Brosmer, where if you put him on the practice squad, I think he's going to get poached pretty quickly. Same with a guy like Joe Huber. Rough couple games to end the preseason against the Titans and the Patriots. Couple boneheaded penalties, false starts, holdings, hand to the face, whatever it is. I think that can be cleaned up, if he does go to the practice squad and kind of refine your craft in a way. But I think he has a strong case to make the 53-man roster. Centers, I think, are pretty light. Joe Huber, I think he's had a little bit of work at center during training camp. So if, he's kind of like your break glass in case of emergency with your center position with Ryan Kelly, Michael Juergens, and then Joe Huber, if you want to add that. So defense, we don't have to talk too much about it. I think it's pretty much the same as Drew's. Other than that, I really like our defense this year. I think our front seven is probably one of the better front sevens in the NFL this year. Granted, they stay healthy. You have guys like Jonathan Grenard, Pro Bowler, All-Pro. Van Ginkel can get up to that level as well. Dallas Turner, very promising training camp. So Gabriel Murphy, really good preseason too. So you have really good edge rushers, defensive tackles, or DNs, whatever you want to classify them as. Javon Hargrave, Allen, two veterans on there, Jalen Redmond. Kind of getting some more playing time this year. Levi Drake Rodriguez, another step up from last year. Really excited to see how he pans out this year. Tyron Ingram Dawkins, the rookie, I guess impressing a lot of people at camp and in the preseason. I don't know if he played in the last game or not. I can't remember. But Elijah Williams, the big highlight that he had against the Titans was that kickoff return. Kind of had a nice little hit stick in there. So that was nice to see. Kind of got banged up, though. Linebackers, no real surprises there. Cornerback room. I would like to see the Vikings maybe add a guy in there, because once you get to Byron Murphy, Isaiah Rodgers, those are your two top guys. It's kind of like the wide receivers in a way. Just going off of defense. Byron Murphy, not comparing him to Justin Jefferson by any means, but he's kind of like your Jefferson and your Addison. Murphy and Rodgers. Jeff Okudah is kind of like your drop-off guy, like Jalen Naylor is. And then Mekhi Blackmon, not a great showing in preseason, but training camp, he looked all right. Nothing eye-opening, but you need depth at that cornerback position, and I think he's going to be there. I think if he's going to turn it around, it's going to be with Brian Flores and that Vikings defense. Samaya Vaughn, really strong preseason and training camp as well. Dwight McLaughlin, really strong training camp. So that's, like I said, not too many surprises there. Safeties, we got Harrison Smith, Josh Metellus, Theo Jackson, Jay Ward, Tavir Thomas, the same as Drew. I mean, you got your core guys there. Theo Jackson, Josh Metellus, I think are going to be really interesting to watch this year. Josh Metellus is going to get more, I think more playing time. It's not like he's a real role player because he plays slot, every single position on the defense pretty much. So I'm not going to go through all the positions, but Jay Ward, really strong preseason as well. Tavir Thomas, like Drew said, really good special teamer, one of the best in the league. I don't know if you go with Tavir Thomas or Tim Jones, two good special teamers. I think Tavir Thomas is a little better, but special teams, you got Andrew DePaula, Will Reichard, Ryan Wright. I think Oscar Chapman does go to the practice squad. I think what kind of scared off the Vikings in a way was that Tennessee game where Oscar Chapman was not a great holder by any means. Kind of bobbled it. He kind of got it straight, but you can't bobble that thing for Will Reichard. You can't set him up for failure. So other than that, I didn't really mess around too much with the practice squad and the IR. Jalen Naylor, I don't know if he goes to IR or not. And if he does, then you definitely got to add that other wide receiver in Adam Thielen. A lot of these guys pretty much the same. Kind of took Joe Huber off the practice squad, moved Thayer Thomas to the practice squad. I think, I don't know if I've shared this with you guys, but Thayer Thomas to me kind of gives me Chad Beebe vibes. Not saying that they're the same player, but kind of get the vibes from that. And then Lucky Jackson kind of gives me Tristan Jackson vibes, where they're both pretty good, like special teams guys too. And then they haven't really had a chance to like really play starting like in the NFL, just preseason stuff right now. But I feel like if you were to give them a chance, like Chad Beebe and Tristan Jackson, I feel like they would make the most out of it. So Lucky Jackson, not a real strong preseason, couple drops, big time drops actually. I think his best game was probably the first game against the Texans. But other than that, really, really bummed out about Rondale Moore going to IR. I really thought he'd have a big role in this offense. Just sucks to see him, tear his knee up again. Jordan Addison will be back in 3 games after that suspension. But yeah, other than that, no real surprises other than maybe Joe Huber. Let's see, maybe Tim Jones, because I don't know if you keep 2 special teams guys. Sias Bolden, I don't know if he will 100% make it, but yeah, other than that, let me know who you guys think will make be a surprise roster addition, who might be a surprise cut. There's going to be some surprise cuts that I don't know if we really added in our rosters, but yeah, other than that, I think we did pretty good in our rosters. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually kind of glad you brought up this one guy too as a wide receiver option, but granted he hasn't had a training camp or anything, but he has had experience with playing with JJ at training camp. Does Tristan Jackson find his way back in Minnesota? I don't know where he's at right now, but
let me look that up.
What's that?
Let me look that up.
Yeah, well, you look it up. But his last time I remember, he went to Arizona. But does he find his
still with the Cardinals?
He's still with the Cardinals. Yeah. So if he gets waived by the Cardinals, does he get snagged by the Vikings? So he kind of knows what the Kevin O'Connell offense is all about. Really showed out with JJ in the preseason last year when he was playing, in the week 1 game before his injury. But I think he didn't have like over 100 yards or something crazy like that too. I think he had like a ton of yards in that game, and he had the
Yeah, I
touchdown.
think someone close to that.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, is that maybe a wide receiver 3 option? Like maybe a really sneaky under the radar, deep sleeper guy? I know maybe some fans may not want that. They may want somebody bigger name, but if you're trying to go to the bargain bin, maybe you look at Tristan Jackson. Maybe this is the time where he finally gets his moment, and especially if you'd have a really good offense to go with, and Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson being on the other side of the ball. And I believe you'd also have some, maybe Ty Felton too. So depending on what he's doing, but I feel like he could be a good, maybe under the radar candidate to be that wide receiver that they snag during waivers. But we'll have to wait till Tuesday. I believe the expiration is at 4 Eastern. I think is when they have to be finalized. So
something around that. Yeah.
yeah. So I think 4 Eastern, so 3 Central, which would be Minnesota time for the Viking fans out there. So. Yeah, so I think right now, I think we're just kind of waiting and seeing on any potential moves that could happen. Obviously, things can change. We still got 2 days, 3 days left before rosters get finalized. So, a name to watch, like we mentioned earlier, was Carson Wentz. Could definitely be on this roster. Would definitely be a cool story to see. But I think Carson Wentz, with him not being on a significant roster, really getting really any significant time last year. Maybe he's starting to think things are starting to end where he might be contemplating retirement. So could be just a 1-year deal and then rides off to the sunset with his childhood team. So would not be surprised if that happens. But I really like Carson Wentz a lot coming out of the draft. And then he went to Philly. Kind of sucked for me because the Vikings are doing so well, and it got frustrating because he kept winning all those games. Philly, and we wanted the 2017 Vikings to have that 1 seed. So. But ultimately ended up hurting us in the end with with the knee injury over there for the Eagles fans over there and the NDSU fans. So, but yeah, we'll see what happens there. Definitely be kind of a fun local kid story to kind of root for. Like Cashman or Thielen, like we've seen in years prior.
Yeah, so for those of you that are watching on the YouTube channel, you guys can see the little ticker at the bottom. Those are the important dates up until week 1 in Chicago. So first one, August 26th, which is in 3 days by the time we're recording this. Rosters are reduced down to 53 players. So they have to do that within 3 days. Make your roster cuts down to your final 53. The next day after that, at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, is your waiver claim. So the Vikings can put in waiver claims. I don't know where they stand in the waiver wire. I think they're towards the end because of their playoff seeding, stuff like that. Kind of how you finished the year last year. I'm pretty sure that's how that works.
Yeah, it's the draft order from the previous year. So I think when we picked like 24 or something like that with Jonathan Jackson, like 23, 24, 25, we're in that range.
Something around there.
Because I remember that because they mentioned that in the Tennessee game because they're like, Tennessee could have their pick of the litter because they're the number 1 team in the waiver order pickups, and I think that doesn't change for like a few weeks. I think it's like 4, 5, 6 weeks in until that changes. But but yeah, so that's something to watch out for. So unfortunately, we'll be kind of on the back end of it, but you might be able to snag a good player out of it. So usually a lot of teams, they tend to, there's, I don't want to say an unwritten rule unless it's like a glaring need for a team, but usually there's kind of a somewhat unwritten rule of if you release a guy, they end up going to the practice squad sort of thing, just because there's so many players in the league, they know them better. So, I'm not too concerned about anyone being snagged. I don't think we've had anybody snagged. I think the only guy I can think of where we released and another guy got snagged was Marcus Epps from a few years ago. I think that's the last guy we've had. Yeah, I think that's the last guy we've had that happen to. So, it's not very common. So. But I do think with a guy like Brosmer or, maybe potentially Huber if he makes the roster, I definitely think Brosmer would if the Vikings do release him just because he has been such a, viral quarterback that the NFL has been showing a lot of clips about and how he's been throwing. So I don't think that he would make it past to the practice squad over there. So I think he for sure needs to make that 53.
Yeah, speaking of the practice squad, just an hour after waiver claims is practice squad signings. So cap of 17 players. We kind of went through Drew and I's cap of the practice squad guys who we think might be on there. And then September 2nd is top 51 cap becomes your total cap salary. So I'll let kind of Drew explain that. I'm not real good at explaining the whole cap situation. I'm not a capologist, unlike Drew is. No, I'm just kidding. But Drew knows a lot more about it if you want to explain that too.
So you want me to explain the cap, like how it all works for?
Yeah, how the top 51 cap becomes like your total cap.
Yeah, so essentially it's just your top 51 highest paid players will account towards the cap in, off the 53-man roster, which I believe actually a couple of years ago, I think when we had Ivan Pace, I think there were a couple of games where he wasn't counting towards the cap. So we were getting like a freebie starter out there against the cap. So that was always really nice to see. So, so basically your last two guys or whoever your last two cheapest guys are on your books won't count towards your cap because 99% of the time they're not playing anyways. So the 51 guys will count towards your cap space, and whatever's left over by the end of the year would then roll over to the next year as well. So that's what like teams like Detroit is trying to do with a lot of their guys are coming up on big contracts and whatnot. So they're trying to save by not spending big on like that second edge opposite of Aiden Hutchinson to try to roll it over. So when those contracts start to kick in, like Goff's contract, I think really kicks in next year. So to try to offset that a little bit more. So I think that's what the Vikings are going to try to do as well. So I think right now they're at like 31 million according to over the cap. So that is kind of a general projection. It's not the exact, but just a general projection of where they're kind of standing at. And usually you want to leave about like $10 million to, have during the season just for the elevations and de-elevations by moving guys up and down on the practice squad. So with that, like I said, I think they're right now projected to be 50 million over next year. So if they have, say 25 million, let's say they use 6 million for this upcoming season for elevations, from demotions and whatnot, that 25 million then roll over. So you're basically cutting that negative deficit in half. So it's a lot easier to work with that and could potentially keep all your guys around for next year. I think the big name to watch for that would be Brian O'Neill going into the last year of his contract. I think is definitely the big one. And I'm not sure about this, but I think Ivan Pace's contract expires. I think he's on the last year of his contract next year, I want to say. If not,
Sounds
it's definitely
right.
this year. So could be a name to watch for that as well. So, and then Ryan Kelly might not be on the roster next year. He has no dead money left. So if they release him, that's like $12 million saved. So I think Michael Juergens is definitely a name to keep an eye out for in the future years. And no relation to Cam Juergens, but definitely seems very eerily similar to what Philly was doing a couple years ago with the transition from Jason Kelce to Cam Juergens. And maybe that's what they need. Maybe Ryan Kelly's like the mentor bridge center, and year one of a new center, they win the Super Bowl like Philly does. Maybe Minnesota wins it the next year. Who knows? But things will definitely get interesting. So I think, me personally, I think when it comes to final assessments, we could maybe talk about that going into another episode. But I do think this team is very, very close on where they need to be, especially if JJ is the guy that we're all expecting him to be. So yeah, I'm definitely just excited for the season, and hopefully we have another successful season, maybe a little bit better postseason run, but successful season nonetheless with the new team this year.
Yeah, I think our next couple episodes before we get to week 1 are gonna be wide receiver trades, other acquisitions, maybe possible surprise cuts, kind of stuff like that throughout the next couple weeks. Because September 8th is our week 1 game against the Chicago Bears Monday night. So we'll probably have an episode probably Monday night, Tuesday night, kind of recapping the Chicago Bears game. So yeah, other than that, not too much action. Kind of relax while you guys can before we get to week 1. Real stress inducing. So yeah, other than that, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Skol Vikes.